the first Souls game, Kingsfield, 25 years later by Iron Pineapple.
As a member of the Souls community, I've probably seen this conversation like 100 times. Man, Dark Souls, what a great game. It's just crazy to think it all started here.
Objection!
Actually, Demon Souls is where it really started.
And then every time, there's a third guy, and he metaphorically pushes up his glasses like an anime villain and says,
Actually, the real first Souls game is FromSoft's Kingsfield back in the 90s.
Is it though? Is it really? I guess we gotta play it. But you know, 25 years ago, that's a pretty long time. I only know one way to go back that far. Yeah.
The T-pose. Oh, this is great. Oh, this is cool. I love it. The sunglasses. I love this. PS1? Is that PlayStation 1? I do really enjoy this. I'm looking forward to this. I think that was a really strong minute intro there. I absolutely loved that. As somebody that, you know, plays Souls, I absolutely love Souls. Did I necessarily start with 1? No, I actually started on Dark Souls 3. Like, I will 100% say that. And you're going to hear those people in the comments, casual. I started on Demon Souls. Except I have it on good authority that 90% of people that say they actually started on Demon Souls are lying, because Dark Souls was really when it started taking off in the West. And even less of that will actually have started on Kingsfield proper. So I'm very interested to see just how much Dark Souls DNA this has. I'm very interested.
Now first, I have to point out this logo animation at the start.
Bro. The Millennium Eye? Bro, what? Very, what, 90s? Oh my god.
Miyazaki, if you're watching, this is kind of rad as hell.
Can we bring that back?
Please bring this back.
Please?
Thank you. But anyway, Kingsfield, or technically Kingsfield 2. Pause real quick if you're curious why that's the case.
Question, why is it technically Kingsfield 2? Answer, basically the original Kingsfield came out for PS1 in Japan December 1994, because this is 90s. However, for instance, since it was never released outside of Japan and still hasn't, when FromSoft released their next game in June 1995, they titled it Kingsfield 2. Within Japan, simply used Kingfield for the Western release. Question, but why are you playing this Kingsfield instead of the real Kingsfield 1? There's 2 reasons for this. 1, I would have had to rely on a fan translation to play it, but I really wanted to see how the actual localization team handled bringing it into English. Actually valid, makes sense. 2, skimming through some opinions online for where to start, suggesting me that Kingsfield 2 was probably a better starting point for experiencing the series and would make a far more interesting game to discuss in this video. Editor's note, for this video, I refer to this game by its US title, Kingsfield. Interesting, actually. That's so cool.
So you immediately just gain control of your character on this beach. And yeah, from there you're free to explore. And yeah, you're free to go around and explore. Okay, Kingsfield. I see you.
Fair enough.
I see you.
Yeah, just instant death. Okay. Well, look at the HUD, though. That compass in the top right is messing with me.
You know what, Kingsfield? You have my attention. I should probably mention the graphics before we get any further. They look pretty rough, right?
A little bit.
But guess what? They actually look considerably worse, but I'm just playing on an emulator with some settings adjusted. With how it actually looks on the PS1, this game is crunchy as hell. It certainly looks its age and then some. So for the sake of you as the audience, I thought it'd be nicer to decrunchify it with a higher.
No, I think the decrunchification is completely fine. I like the HUD. I like how minimalistic it is. I do like that. You can also see the HP at the top left, HP and MP. It's got that standard, you know, HP, MP, or HP stamina split already. The compass is it's in your face. Don't get me wrong, but it's super minimalistic and I love it. I think that this is actually a strength of emulation, right? I, obviously legally have to say own a copy of your game, like the amount of Pokemon games that I legally own, right? I loan everything through Gen 2, Gen 3, etc. XD Gale Darkness Coliseum, but the issue is what happens if the hardware breaks down, or in the case of games like Metal Gear, right, where you get the Metal Gear Remaster Collection that comes on out, or the re-release of them, and emulators are upscaling it to 4K better than the remaster is, the official, port, right? I think that's where emulation strength can be. And especially when getting PS1 hardware nowadays and trying to get an upscaler in it, or even if it's internal or it's an external upscaler like I have, right? I have a USB upscaler for a lot of my retro stuff. It just turns into a pain really, really quick. It's super easy to hook up a 64 upscale and stream it to Twitch. I've done it. It's really easy in OBS, but it requires stuff that isn't exactly, sold anymore, and if your console breaks or if your disc starts wearing out, you start running into issues really quick. So that does, for a game's preservation standpoint, like I would love to go back and play Kingsfield. Like looking at this so far, I think it'd be very interesting to analyze the predecessor to Dark Souls. I think it'd be super cool. But the issue is, one, scarcity of copies. Two, I'm going to be paying a premium. Three, do I have even the hardware to actually run it, right? That's where you start running into a really weird territory with games preservation. But so far, I'm liking the presentation, and I do like that using an emulator, just saying, yeah, I did this to decrunchify this. I think that was great to actually say, and it helps like normalize for a games preservation standpoint to utilize emulators for this. Right? Even if you still have the actual copy of it, you can use an emulator for purposes like this, for comfortability, quality of life features, like how the Majora's Mask randomizer uses the D-pad, right? You can use your transformation mask and Ocarina all on that D-pad. And I think that is a big L that Nintendo hasn't done that.
Resolution, more stable frame rate, and no texture dithering. I totally understand if this is a grave sin to the Kingsfield purists out there, but I really think it's for the best and keeps the style and tone of the game intact. But yeah, even with this upgrade, the visuals are still pretty aged. But you know what? They actually grew on me, especially the models for the enemies and NPCs. There's just this sort of old school charm to them that I can't help but be into. Maybe it's just my RuneScape nostalgia showing, but I think it kind of works. Actually, it doesn't always work.
That's
so when I finally stopped dying
textures.
to giant squid attacks, I spent the next 15 or so minutes just running around and grabbing items and gear. And while I was running around, I very quickly had to adapt to the control scheme because golly gee, this game has one. So this is a first-person game, and the control scheme for these types of games has been standard for like 20 years at this point. You move with this stick, you look around with this stick.
Right,
but in 1995, this wasn't the case yet. Here's the PS1 controller. I hope you can see the problem. So let's go over how Kingsfield decided to handle this because it's sort of interesting and probably the hardest part to get used to while playing in 2020. Go forward, go back, turn left, turn right. Okay so far. Strafe left, strafe right, look up, look down.
Good God, that is a control scheme though. I applaud FromSoft for making it work though. You really start to see, what is it, after Halo Combat Evolved and Call of Duties around probably the mid 2000s, you start seeing this kind of control scheme on Xbox controllers start to be normalized. Even now we have like Halo Infinite and stuff that mimic Call of Duty a lot more, where I actually, when I go to Infinite back to MCC and vice versa, it takes me several games just to actually get my bearings. Like that is tanky AF, but like, wow, that's interesting as a control scheme. Like I feel like it'd be super intuitive once you've immersed yourself in it, and I like the ingenuity of the system.
This definitely was uncomfortable, but I did eventually get used to it. On the topic of this being a first-person game, I want to mention one more thing. For those of you that know your video game history, you'll know that the original Doom actually came out just a year and a half before Kingsfield. This is notable because essentially every first-person game that came out around then was compared to Doom. And if you look at some reviews that were written at the time about Kingsfield, you'll see that they mention Doom. Now this is funny to me because Kingsfield being compared to Doom sort of mirrors how everything is compared to Dark Souls these days.
No.
And there's something kind of poetic about that.
That's actually really cool to think about, actually.
The combat is unavoidably a big part of a game like this. So what's it like? Now, I don't want to mince words here. The combat is pretty rough and absurdly clunky. This is how the majority of combat experiences play.
So I'm noticing there's a lot of strike and move back, not dissimilar to new Dark Souls titles, right? Where, say, Dark Souls 3, right? You're going to whack something, and you're going to jump back, or you're going to backstep back, right? Or Bloodborne, you have that little backstep, and it's that go in, hit, bob out. That's super interesting to see. It almost feels like the dodge roll was a direct evolution of this. Oh, it's super cool.
You attack, back up, wait for your meter to fill up again. Attack, back up, and yeah. Later on, it does get a bit more varied with multiple enemies and having to maneuver yourself around, but this is the core. Also, you do get magic, which is actually pretty cool. Early on, it's just your standard fireball or whatever, but by the end of the game, you get some really neat stuff like an ice dragon that homes in and traps enemies in a crystal. Genuinely cool stuff. If nothing,
I'm super upset that in modern games, we don't have cool stuff like that. Like, you go back to old Magic and older games and stuff like that, and like that, right? You have an ice dragon that will just capture something, right? Oh my God, can you imagine if that was put in, say, Elden Ring, where you just have a spell that just summons this, like, ice dragon and it flies at a target and it'll encircle and slow it or something like that? We just don't really see stuff like that, in my opinion. Like, that's super cool. And you look back at older games like this, and even Morrowind to a degree, right? You look at Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. What was some of the nutty thing? And I opened up in the comments section what your nuttiest creation has been. Like, just the sheer stuff you can create in Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind system. I think that Magic, as gaming has progressed, has kind of gone to the wayside. And I mean, I liked Elden Ring. I think that Elden Ring had a really cool revitalization of Magic. Like, you could Kamehameha bosses with the right build and stuff like that. It was super cool. But this just feels like a different era, and it's so cool to look back on and then see how Magic and FromSoft games really kind of fell to the wayside, right? Dark Souls 1, sure, you could make your Dark Sorcery builds. Dark Souls 2, I don't really hear anybody running Magic. Dark Souls 3, yes, you did have your players, you know, with giant Big Hat Logan Hat popping up into multiplayer using their deep sorceries, but I would think that everyone is using more like strength or dex builds or pyromancies, right? They're not really using sorceries, crystal sorceries, anything like that. So it's interesting to see that here there still seems to be an emphasis on it, but Magic feels like it has a lot more utility and does a lot of cool things. And there's the word utility, right? Do we not have the best sorcery in Dark Souls 1? Power Within. You're welcome. I think it's super cool just to see the design ethos and logos hasn't really changed a whole heck of a lot, in my opinion. At least the core of this, the actual fundamental foundations are still here.
Else, the combat does do a good job of making you feel powerful by the end of the game when you're one-shotting all the old enemies. Now, all that being said, I can actually accept the combat for what it is, but the pause menu UI, I don't know, man. You need to pause the game constantly. This is because you need to heal constantly. So here's what the process looks like. You pause, select items, slowly scroll down your big list of items, then use the item. This is made worse by the fact that most enemy encounters seem designed so that you sort of need to just tank damage to get through them. Anyway, it's just incredible.
In all fairness, I mean, that's how I've played Fallout. Those that have seen my Fallout New Vegas stuff, I mean, I'm pausing constantly and just jamming stim packs, right? I do like that. Let's go back a little bit because there's actually something I wanted to note about that. Look at this, right? So you have your menu and then your use item. You actually get a visual representation of that. Do people not like Skyrim because it does the same thing, right? What spell are you looking at? Oh, you're looking at flames, right? Oh, it shows a little like fire glowy thing, right? Or you're looking at your bottle of anti-venom. It has the model of anti-venom on screen. Did we not praise the Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim for that? This is just that, but years earlier. This is 90s, right? That's so cool. I feel if you cleaned up this HUD or even made the UI a little more user-friendly, right? Quality of life features, right? I think that this could go super hard because, like, oh, we're looking at Necron's map. You have a map up on screen.
Select item.
We're looking at Moonstone. Here, have this oval.
Slowly scroll.
You're looking at Gold Potion. It's a crystal flask with gold liquid inside of it. I think that this is super cool. Like, I don't, even then, the pausing is for a lot of people, like Elder Scrolls games especially, right? The amount of times you have to pause, save scum, or pause, jam your stim packs, eat your, 20,000 cheese wheels while fighting a dragon, right? I think that this is very similar in aspects. I just think if it could be streamlined a little bit, I think this could deliver super hard.
Scroll down your big list of items, then use the item. This is made worse by the fact that most enemy encounters seem designed so that you sort of need to just tank damage to get through them. Anyway, it's just incredibly cumbersome, and it got in the way of my fun quite a bit. So after a couple hours of playing, something dawned on me. Yes, the combat can be pretty awful, but that's not the emphasis, is it? Exploration is where the emphasis is placed.
Okay.
And then I realized, this game is a first-person Metroidvania. Now before you start writing an essay about how I'm wrong, hear me out. Yes, when we think of Metroidvanias, it's usually a 2D game with platforming, but look at what Kingsfield has. It's got an interconnected world, as well as obstacles and locked doors that you can only pass after getting the necessary items and abilities. Once I made that connection of, yeah, this is actually a Metroidvania, things started to click. The navigating, the backtracking, the secret finding, that's what this game is about. Oh, this door is locked. Oh, I got a key now for it. Nice, a bow. Now I can fight that giant bug. Sick, I have a flute. Now I can use it to summon bridges of light to go over gaps. Metroidvania. While this is pretty cool, it unfortunately doesn't pair super well with the extremely samey looking areas and wall textures, with often no environmental details to help you tell which area is which. It's pretty easy to get lost. Like on one hand, yes, figuring out where to go is a key part of the experience of Metroidvanias, but when you can't even tell where you are because half of the rooms look identical, the experience of navigation becomes a lot more tedious.
I do think that that is a good point to bring up, though. Like, going into Dark Souls, right? We can tell that we're here at the above Undead Burg, right? And you can kind of keep track of where you're at, you know, maybe like going down to Capra Demon, going from Capra Demon down into the depths, right? Going up to Gaping Dragon, going into, oh, well, I'm going to go here. Oh, now you're in New Londo, or now you're in Darker Guard, right? And health areas are kind of different. It seems like they're using the same textures. I'm sure that's technological limitations, but I don't really think a mod would fix that, though, because that might turn into a Skyrim unofficial patch type thing, where if you aren't aware of the Skyrim unofficial patch, it actually does have a lot of blowback onto it. It has a lot of controversy surrounding it, because it actually does, rather than just fix things, it does change things within the game, and it kind of oversteps its bounds. And that has led people to, I think they've tried to actually do the Skyrim official patch without those changes. It goes into, if you're going to unofficially patch a game, or if you're going to bug fix and you say overstep and you start adding textures to a wall, right? Is that necessarily keeping the game's core integrity? Or would you do something like you keep the same color, but maybe you add textures and, like, you know, like maybe some rock walls are a little more uneven, or there's some cracks in some of them, right? To help, oh yeah, that's the wall with the jagged crack in it, right? That is a very delicate balancing act when it comes to games preservation, and games modding. It's a very interesting subject to bring up. I think that it's super interesting to compare that to a Metroidvania. I don't know if I agree wholeheartedly, but I will also wholeheartedly say I'm not entirely caught up on the whole particulars. I understand what's being said, but that's one of those things that if I were to pitch this as a Metroidvania, Kingsfield, I don't think that would pass the test. It feels different enough.
By the way, if you want to have your mind blown real quick, most of the Soulsborne games are actually Metroidvanias too. Yes, you have to stretch the definition a bit, but the world structure pretty much matches. Think about it. The interconnected world, the backtracking, the locked doors, the progression via key items, it's all there. And I think a lot of that inspiration, to some extent, came from Kingsfield, and that's pretty neat.
I don't necessarily think it's a Metroidvania, because I know I've had the conversation about Dark Souls and Metroidvanias before, and how Dark Souls doesn't fall within that definition, but I do think that Dark Souls definitely took heavy inspiration from the themes that you can clearly see in Kingsfield. And we have Demon Souls, which really kind of brought the formula into a new light, going into Dark Souls, which Dark Souls was really the spark in the Western gaming market that gave these games attention. So it's very interesting to see how philosophy from the 90s is still affecting games like Elden Ring to this day.
Speaking of exploration, I do have to mention one big aspect of it that I did find pretty irritating in this game: fake walls. Now, if you played any of the Souls games, you should be pretty familiar with fake or illusory walls, right? The way they typically work is you find a suspicious looking wall, you attack it, and there's a secret behind it. The real key with why I think this works is that there aren't too many of them, and there's also often some sort of environmental hint to help suggest to you that, hey, there might be a secret here. Kingsfield has neither of these. There are so many fake walls, and they are often placed seemingly at random. Now, the effect that this has on gameplay is that you end up needing to mash X on every single wall of every single room and hallway in the game. And I'm not exaggerating here, I mean every room. So to be clear, I really do like secrets in games like this, but when you're required to rub your face against every wall, it becomes a lot less fun and a lot more tedious than it ought to be. With most games in the Souls series,
I don't know how you fix that though. Like, that's an interesting conundrum to face, where, yes, you want these walls to be hidden and stuff, but due to limitations, right, you can't exactly have, you know, different assets, different walls, different textures everywhere, right? I'm sure they're using a lot of the memory and space just to run the standard game, right? But that's one of those things I look at and go, if you're required to play the game, in a vacuum, taking this explanation as this is how this works. If you're required to play the game by hugging your face against the wall and mashing the interact button, that doesn't feel right. That feels like a misstep in design logic, but I don't really know the proper fix for that. The proper fix to that is going to be something like have textures and environmental hints and stuff like that, right? Maybe there's torches throughout the overworld, right? And if there is a hidden wall nearby due to specific sealing magics, maybe instead of the fire being red, the fire is blue, right? Where someone can go through, oh yeah, sometimes the fire is blue, sometimes the fire is red in rooms, right? and or you have some rooms where maybe the fire is blue, but there's something else next to it, and if it's a blue flame with something else next to it causing the blue flame, right, a big magical object, a static object in the overworld, right, okay, then there's not a hidden wall in there. But if it's a blue flame and that is absent, right, it's that subtle environmental storytelling and having these different things that people and players can notice in order to gauge if there's something in the environment. But even that fix, I feel, compromises the design philosophy of Kingsfield, and I think we're starting to fall into that Skyrim official patch territory. So I don't think even that necessarily fixes. I think having a better textured overworld and more hints like archways and stuff like that are consistent throughout the game, I think that might have fixed that a little bit. But I think that this is definitely one of those, like, this is the inception of the idea. Cool. We see the origin point. Now we have to run with it for you to get things like the invisible walls in Ash Lake in Dark Souls 1, right? Going into, say, the Ring City and having that one where there's, like, 3 invisible walls in the Ring City, and you get a spell at the end of it, I think it was. And they're a lot better with those kinds of things now. But everything has an origin point. Everything has an inception. And while the idea might be sound, the execution doesn't feel like it really works a whole heck of a lot here. So it's interesting to see the origin of invisible walls and these kinds of things from Kingsfield into modern day. It's very cool to see the progress over time.
It's very possible to beat them and have no idea what happened from a narrative perspective. Who did I just kill? Wait, what happened? Why am I doing this? The reason this can happen is because the story presents itself through little bits and pieces and item descriptions and dialogue from NPCs scattered around instead of something with more structure like cutscenes that lay it all out. That sort of story presentation may have taken inspiration from Kingsfield because it is very much the same with this game. Just like Dark Souls, you can beat the final boss and say to yourself, wait, what exactly just happened? As for how the story is presented, you can come across NPCs and they'll explain little things. They mostly make sense, but there are a few localization gems here and there that are pretty entertaining. The way the NPCs are spread out and the way in which they say cryptic things to you definitely gives the game a Soulsy feel. This plus the general atmosphere gives an almost ethereal mood to the game. Like, yeah, just take this guy for example. He's, wait a minute. Now, I want to give a quick
I think that's a good thing to mention, though. I think that's a good thing to point out, where Dark Souls tells its story in a very human-like approach, in a very real-life-like approach, right? Real life, you don't exactly have a cutscene showcasing an SUV coming to your drive-through window, right? You don't have a cutscene introducing the workday, right? You kind of just go to home, home to work, and you work forward from that, right? Where you have someone, coming in and, maybe your buddy coming in, and you piece together from their conversation that they're absolutely tired tonight. They drank way too much last night, right? It's not that there's a narrative cutscene that just tells you what happens, right? And I think that subtle storytelling and choosing to engage with the medium to find the lore you want, I think is far superior in a lot of cases to a forced narrative crammed down your throat. As someone who recently ran through Fallout New Vegas, Old World Blues for the first time, and even the Sierra Madre, Dead Money for the first time, I still love Dead Money. I think it's great. And having to piece together the narrative from conversations and stuff. If you want to blitz that DLC, or both those DLCs really, you can absolutely do that. I missed the toaster in the epilogue for Old World Blues, and I am so sad I missed that toaster because this toaster is the best thing in Old World Blues. There's a lot of good things, don't get me wrong. I love that toaster though. But you can miss it, right? And then your epilogue doesn't have the toaster. It doesn't have Democracy Officer book shredder, right? It doesn't have any of that. You're encouraged to, go forth, to engage with these things, to do the quest, to interact with the environment, to interact with the NPCs and characters, right? In order to fully grasp the story. Because you can get to the end like I did, and you're like, is the Dr. Mobius guy just an idiot? And then, it has to get clarified that, oh no, yeah, these guys are actually just insane, the think tank. And Mobius was trying to keep them there in a recursive loop, which I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like, I had got the initial notes of that, but because I didn't go super deep into it, I missed it. And you can do the same thing with Dark Souls. You can do the same thing where, lighting. If I don't light the first flame, this just is a big middle finger to Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, and the and his whole way of white, and it's the better option, right? Well, then you go to Ulasil and you see what happens with the Abyss Touch citizens. Well, is that necessarily the best idea? But unless you're looking for it, unless you're engaging with the environment, you don't have that understanding of the story. And the fact that Kingsfield in the 90s just kind of has this unlock, and it's that organic interaction is super cool. I like it, but then again, I like games more like Majora's Mask, where you have NPCs and stuff that move around. And yes, you have your cutscenes. Yes, you have your overarching, we need to do this narrative. But talking to, going to the ranch and talking to Crimea if the moon's about to fall is going to give Romani some Shata Romani, which is alleged and inferred to be alcoholic in nature, right? Adds to the story in ways that if it was ham-fisted down your throat with some kind of narrative cutscene or whatever, it wouldn't have the same impact. And I think FromSoft does that very well.
To the fact that Kingsfield will absolutely let you soft lock yourself or just make the game way harder.
Oh, that's so
The biggest
cool.
example of this is how you can sell any item in the game, including important keys.
Really?
If you really want to, the game will just let it happen. This reminded me of how the Souls games handle themselves. Like, hey, if you want to kill Andre and permanently make the game more difficult in the process, you're
Yeah.
allowed to. And with both Kingsfield and Dark Souls, I can't help but respect that FromSoft has allowed for these scenarios.
Huh.
In my eyes, it shows a level of respect for the players by giving them this freedom to screw themselves over. You just very rarely see that these days. Also, I want to point out that if you do decide to do something, such as sell important keys, it's not like the game has tricked you into doing so. It simply gives you the choice and lets you suffer the consequences.
Yeah, that should
and
be
you know
fine.
what? Maybe I'm crazy for liking something like that, but I do.
No, I don't think Iron Pineapple's crazy at all here. I think that's such a good thing that more games need to do, and a lot of games in modernity don't actually do. Going back to, say, something like Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, right? The game will tell you if your save is bricked, quote unquote, right? The thread of prophecy has been severed. You're forced to walk in this doomed world or reload a save file, right? Say if you gank Vivek, or if you gank Yagram Bagarn, or you gank anyone else that is crucial to the main story, you can, quote unquote, brick your game. For those of you that know out there or watch Patrician TV's review on it, right? You know that there's technically a backdoor. As long as you know where to get Wraithguard, as long as you know how to finish the story, right? The whole Dagoth or Red Mountain segment, you can do that. So you can gank Vivek. I guess you can pickpocket him, but pickpocketing doesn't work because of how the coding works for pickpocketing, especially items of a certain value in Morrowind. And Yagram Bagarn, there's also a workaround for him if he's the one that ended up getting ganked, right? And later, we got to see in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion and Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim the essential NPC flags, right? Where these players will go down, or the NPCs will go down, but they won't stay down. And it doesn't show respect for the player, which the counter argument becomes, well, what happens if I just let, Martin Septim he gets ganked in the overworld by a goblin or something like that? Well, I mean, but is there a workaround? And at that point, it should, is there a way that the devs can make something that is a workaround similar to the whole situation as I just discussed in Morrowind? Or you make it a system where they can go down. They're essential NPCs. They can go down, but if you deliver the final blow, you as the character, right, as the player, if you deliver the final blow, you can gank that character and they're just done. They're just actually dead, right? But, then the counter argument is, well, what happens if I'm in the middle of combat and I accidentally slash and, I gank them? Well, I mean, at that point, you probably have a former save or you're just bad at the game, right? As somebody that has done similar in games, I also understand that I'm just bad at games. So I think that the fact that this just lets you, look, you can sell this. We're not going to say no. Like, you can sell this, yeah. You having to have that cognizance, right, of, hey, should I sell this integral item for progression for the game? No? Yeah, that sounds about right. I think is super cool.
Kingsfield is also pretty quirky. Not so much a Zoe Deschanel quirky, but more a, hey, the developers had some neat ideas quirky. So I want to highlight a couple. The first is this teleporting system. The way it works is you insert this key onto a pedestal found at save points, and then you can teleport back to this location using the corresponding gate in your inventory. Since you'll only have one key and one gate for most of your playthrough, this creates an interesting risk-reward dynamic whenever you want to move the key. Since you physically have to pick up the key and move it to a new location, you lose your warping ability as a safety net while shifting it somewhere else. To add to this dynamic, there are quite a few areas in the game where if you fall into them, you'll actually be stuck and soft locked unless you have a warp point set up. So overall, this adds an extra layer of decision making when exploring that I haven't quite seen in other games. The second cool idea I want to talk about involves the rhombus keys. So there are quite a few doors that require these rhombus keys to get through. Think of them as like your generic dungeon key. Now what's interesting is that the doors you use them on are one-way doors both ways. What I mean by that is that they require a key for each direction you enter through. And what's also also interesting is that you can pick up these keys and reuse them.
Whoa,
this
wait a
creates
minute.
scenarios where if you're clever with how you use and reuse keys, you can gain access to more areas. So yeah, I just thought this was pretty neat, and I'm honestly surprised I haven't seen something similar in a Zelda game. Unless I'm just forgetting, maybe?
No, I don't think so. That is so cool, though. That rewards game knowledge. Like how I think like Black Mage Final Fantasy 14 rewards game knowledge. Being able to know where to stand, what hits you can take, etc. Like, I think that that's so cool because you can use the keys in whatever order you see fit and pick them up. And as long as you know the game, it can reward you. And you can actually have a surplus of keys or have different routes available that, say, your first-time player or average player would not. That is super cool, actually. Like, wow. What was the other point he talked about there? It was the other key, right? Oh, sorry. No, it was the teleporting system actually sounds cool. I think more games need a Mark Recall kind of thing like Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind had, right? Having a key that you can pop down and you pop an ability to go back to said pedestal, I think is super cool. And I want to move this. Well, it is a high risk, high reward. You are moving it, but if you find yourself in a situation like that soft lock situation, very cool. I do take issue with game developers knowingly putting soft lock locations in games like that. Like it seems like, falling down into this cavern, right, and being stuck there. Because that implies that your players do have that, like do have access to that ability. And if it isn't, it could really be frustrating for a player and brick their game. But I do like what they're doing. I do think that that's a cool thing. Even if it's like a super long, you get teleported back to the first city. So say you're like 4 dungeons in, right? And you get into one of those situations. Having an emergency, you can use this. It maybe wears out your equipment a lot because of a forced teleportation, right? But having some kind of absolute last resort thing like that, right? Like high risk option like that, or maybe you're losing half your health, right? But I think having an emergency way out of that could be an easy fix for that. That's just me taking issue with absolute soft lock locations. But other than that, I think both of these are really cool in terms of design.
Right, so there are a lot of gameplay mechanics central to the Souls series. Bonfires, an Estus flask, dodge rolls, making your character look like Shrek. But there's one that I feel gets overlooked sometimes. Backstabs. At their core, backstabs reward the player for getting behind an enemy by letting you do a lot of damage or even outright killing an enemy. Right. Now, why am I talking about backstabs in a Kingsfield video? Because Kingsfield certainly doesn't have them. Or does it? With Kingsfield, if you can manage to maneuver yourself behind certain enemies, you can basically just win because the enemies handle like tanks and can't turn fast enough. As you can see here, I get behind this guy and I just go at it. This is backstabbing in 1995. Now, I'm not claiming that Kingsfield inspired backstabs in the Souls games, but I couldn't help but notice the parallels here and thought it'd be fun to point out.
Right. That's so cool.
Now, fair warning, I'm going to talk about the final boss in this section, so feel free to skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled. All right, we good? Okay, so you go into this arena and it's Necron himself, the guy that all the NPCs have been mentioning constantly. Naturally, Necron starts doing some Street Fighter Shoryukens that launch magic missiles at you. At this point, I was sort of underleveled and undergeared, but I had fully accepted and embraced the jank of this game. So I did the natural thing, and I ran into this little hole in the wall on the edge of the arena that protected me from the missiles while I shot 100 arrows into him for about 5 minutes.
This honestly
actually worked, and naturally, I was pumped as hell. But this actually wasn't the end. Inexplicably, I wound up in the goddamn cyber zone for one more boss. And guess who it was? Calamite. Yes, Calamite from Dark Souls 1. Granted, he's not called that in this game, but just look at the model. It's nearly the same design. Not only that, but the famous Moonlight Greatsword from every Souls game is here too. As for the fight itself, it was 10 straight minutes of slapping him with my sword, spamming magic, and healing every 5 seconds because there were lasers and fire everywhere. Gameplay-wise, this is pretty awful, but whatever. And eventually I got him.
Amazing.
And he blasted off like Team Rocket. The world is now safe. You're welcome, everyone. So guess what I didn't find out until after I beat the game and looked up some things that I missed. This game has unique magic sword attacks for all the special swords in the game.
Wait, what?
Now, I'm not surprised I didn't stumble across this because it requires some precise button inputs with finicky timing. And as far as I can tell, the game never hints at this even existing. To do one of them, it's tap X, tap square, hold triangle, very quickly. So first off, this is really cool. But then it got me thinking about secrets in games that are easy to miss, specifically in FromSoft's other games. In Demon's Souls, an example of this would be World Tendency. If you're playing blind, it's extremely easy to miss everything connected to this. In Dark Souls, an example would be something like Ash Lake. It's a genuinely breathtaking secret area, but it's again, incredibly easy to miss. If you're a game developer, one of the most terrifying things you can do is work on something for hours, or days, or weeks, or months, and then have it never be seen by someone who plays your game. So it takes a lot of courage to hide big things like this for the player. but the payoff is that the secrets they can uncover are really, really cool and actually worthwhile. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this design sensibility when it comes to big secrets. It takes courage and shows respect for the players, and I'm happy that FromSoft is still doing it with all their games to this day. So that's Kingsfield. It definitely shows its age in a lot of ways, and I'd honestly have a hard time recommending it to most people, but despite it all, there's some great nuggets of inspiration in terms of atmosphere and design that are worth looking at, especially within the context of FromSoft's more recent games. And like I said before, there's a lot of jank, but there's an undeniable charm and uniqueness that shines through. Also, I still think it's really interesting as a piece of From Software's history, and it's fun to try and connect the dots between where they were in 1995 and where they are now in 2020.
Still haven't
so yeah,
finished
that's
Sekiro.
it. I hope you found my thoughts interesting or entertaining.
What a
I feel
cool
like this
ice
game very
golem
rarely
texture,
gets
though.
discussed, and I hope I did it justice.
Why did that go so hard, though?
Oh hey, didn't see you there.
Hey, Ring
I was
City.
just staring at the sponsored by Raycon text in the sky. It's me, Swolair. I used to be a chump, but then I got serious with my body.
Swole.
How's that? By using the everyday E25 earbuds while I worked out. My routine
love
is
it.
pretty intense
Double
and not for
door!
everyone, but it does work. These bad boys are half the price of other premium wireless earbuds, but they still sound great. Now, if I'm getting earbuds, you already know what I need. I'm talking Bluetooth pairing, compact design, noise isolating fit, 6 hours of playtime because I don't have time to recharge. And most importantly, it needs to come in blue. Luckily, Raycon has me covered with all of these, so I'm set. If you want to get some for yourself so you can get guns like these, guns like these, click the link in the description. buyraycon.com/ironpineapple and get 15% off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important things to do.
I like that.
Hold on. One last thing. Why is it called Kingsfield? There's not even a dang field in this game. 0 out of 10.
Got him 0 out of 10. No, that ad read was 9 out of 10. I absolutely loved that. It was very thematic. It drew on a lot of the Dark Souls 3 isms that we love. I thought that was super cool. It was very tongue-in-cheek with these guns, right? That was excellent. If you haven't checked out Iron Pineapple, if Souls interests you, even if Souls does, if you're curious about Souls, right, like Dark Souls, go check out Iron Pineapple. Dude just seems really awesome. Dude is one of those people in the Dark Souls community that I've heard nothing but good things about, similar to Vadi Vidya. And, I really can't recommend him enough. I thought this was cool. I thought this was a neat dive back through the history of gaming, kind of taking a little bit of an analytical approach at this, and really seeing that I would one day love to play Kingsfield. I think this could be super cool. And especially with some of the quality of life upgrades, some of the graphical updates we have on emulators, I think that would be super cool to actually go ahead and take a look at. And yeah, I'm curious. What's your experience with Souls? Have you actually played Kingsfield? Have you played any of the Kingsfield sequels that were mentioned earlier? What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that I had some good points? Do you think that was maybe off on some points? Do you agree that this is Metroidvania? Do you think that this is not a Metroidvania? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.